Well, good afternoon and welcome back. Happy New Year. For our Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity webinar series, we're focusing in on workplace mental health. As you all know by now, there's a Q&A box on your screen that you can submit questions to at any time throughout today's presentation. And we'll certainly get to as many as we can at the end. If you've been with us before, you know sometimes that's a challenge, but we do our best. And if you haven't already, please make sure you sign up for emails on our michigan.gov/workplace mental health page. That's where we have all the recordings for our prior webinars. Our new report that we launched in December, if you haven't had a chance to read it, please check it out. And anything else that we're doing is going to be placed on that site. We continue to focus on those three pillars that have impact, those things being things that are happening in the workplace, things that we call affecting the workplace, and then certainly connections to individual behavioral health supports. And we try to make sure that we hit on these throughout the webinar and various content that we use. And we're well into the full steam ahead on the what can we do about it phase of our work. As you heard in November, we launched our LEADS program, which is a pilot program with specific workplace interventions. I'm happy to report back that we have a lot of employers that are interested in participating. I'm also going to share again that because it's a pilot, it's small. We're going to study this, make sure that these interventions have an impact. So we'll try to work with as many as we can, but it'll be relatively limited. But we do have a plan for everybody that doesn't fit in the pilot. So keep sending us information if you want more information, and we'll make sure that we continue to connect with you. In the next couple of weeks, we have another big announcement we're going to share from our department on this workplace mental health focus, our healthy work, healthy mind focus, and kind of what's going to be happening there. We're really excited about, so stay tuned for that. And to kick off 2026 and follow up on our report and all the things that we are doing, we're going to start this year with our three-part series focusing on the impacts of stress and trauma and how to create healthier trauma-informed workplaces. The expert with us today really needs no introductions because you've seen her several times before, and she has been a huge asset for us in Leo behind the scenes in developing all of the work, tools, strategies, and information that we are sharing that has an impact on our workplaces. So our guest today is Vicki Coitz. She is the Director of Trauma and Resilience at the Corporation for a Skilled Workforce, and a recognized expert across the country in this area. And we're very thrilled to have her for this part of the webinar series. Vicki, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. I'm so thrilled to be able to talk with folks today about understanding how toxic stress and trauma affect us at work. So just for anybody who's not familiar with Corporation for a Skilled Workforce, we are a national nonprofit organization that works with workforce development organizations, employers, post-secondary education institutions, et cetera, all across the country on a variety of workforce development topics. We have 5 teams, and one of them is the Trauma and Resilience at Work team. And we provide training and coaching around trauma, mental health, toxic stress, resilience building for workforce development organizations, employers, social services agencies, and higher education in Detroit, in Michigan, but also in many other states, including California, Massachusetts, and Missouri. We've been in Dallas. So we are excited to be able to do such deep work in Michigan and Detroit, and we're excited to work with folks around the country. I am the director of the team on trauma and resilience. I have 25 years in workforce development. I have lived experience with adverse childhood experiences, which is trauma before the age of 18, such as abuse and neglect. And I have experience with being re-triggered in the workplace. I also am battling but winning breast cancer, which is why I've got this lovely cap on. So don't worry a thing about me. Just send some healing prayers. We're kicking its butt. But I wanted to let you know that so that way you didn't wonder what was going on and worry. So today, even though this is a very short webinar, we're going to be talking about 2 topics that may trigger an emotional response in some of you, especially if you're carrying something else with you today. And if it does trigger an emotional response, that's okay. In fact, it's completely normal. Don't fight it. But do prepare yourself for it. So if you find that you're having an anxious response to anything we talk about today, just acknowledge it. Try regulating your breathing with long, deep breaths. Feel free to get up and move around and literally shake out any tension or emotional challenge that you're feeling. Feel free to step away from this webinar for a few minutes to get a drink of water or a cup of tea or coffee. if you feel completely overwhelmed, which is possible considering we're talking about a lot and we're all carrying a lot, given what's going on in the current events in our country, feel free to step away. This webinar is being recorded. You can watch it later when you're in a calmer, safer headspace. I won't be offended. Heck, I won't even know. So feel free to take care of you and do what you need to do for yourself. So why even focus on toxic stress and trauma at work? I mean, many of us don't work with traumatized people. Well, the reason is because most of us, in fact, the Substance Abuse and Mental Services Health Services Agency suggests that 90% of adults in our country have experienced at least one traumatic event in their life. A lot of us are carrying around past trauma. And then you add on in this case, the pandemic. This is a little bit of an old cartoon. Stress, bad news, the situation that we're witnessing in Minnesota. And then we're just carrying this heavy emotional load. And then we have a minor inconvenience, like a report is late, or this webinar wouldn't let me on until 5 minutes before we started. And we have a breakdown because all of that just becomes too much. And then our boss comes along and says, I think you're overreacting. That's what happens in our workplaces every day. And that's why we feel it's very, very important for all of us to understand trauma, whether or not we work with traumatized populations. So just another reason for why we focus on this is because trauma affects employment and our ability to succeed at work. One of the types of trauma that's been researched the most is called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And as I mentioned before, this is adverse experiences that we experienced before the age of 18, such as parental divorce, poverty, abuse, neglect, whether it's emotional or physical. And the studies have shown that individuals who have experienced 2 or more of those ACEs are 1.5, 1.4, 1.8 times more likely to have problems on the job, to be absent from work, because they are dealing with all of those emotional stressors, and it makes work hard sometimes, especially when work is hard and not supportive and may even be a toxic workplace environment. Also more likely to have financial problems. As these number of adverse childhood experiences increase, for example, for individuals with 4 or more, the risk factors for potential employment and financial problems increase. So this isn't to say that those of us who have lived experience with trauma are problem children. It is to say, though, that we've got some boulders that we're carrying around, and it could affect the way that we operate at work. And so we want to talk about that, acknowledge that, and present ideas for how we can address that so we can have healthier work lives. So what exactly is toxic stress and trauma? Well, let's start with stress. So there's a continuum of stress. There's positive stress, and I know that you all have heard Sean say this, so if this is ringing a bell, it's because you've probably heard it already before. But just as a reminder, stress can be positive. It's not always negative. So for example, I experienced positive stress as I was preparing for this presentation. I wanted to do a really good job. Got a little bit of chemo brain fog going on. So, I was like, okay, can I manage this? So that's why I've got my notes written down here. But it's going to be over at 2:30, and it's not a hugely intense level of stress, and I can manage it. My coping mechanisms can manage it. However, if the quantity of stress or the severity of stress increases, we might experience maybe going on for a little bit longer, maybe a little bit more intense, but we can still manage it. It's not keeping us up at night. It's not causing aches and pains. It's not causing our brains to shut down in brain fog. So for example, unfortunately, I've been putting tolerable stress on my teammates because I've been out a lot at work, going to these darn medical appointments, going to chemotherapy for 8 hours every 3 weeks, and they've had to pick up a little bit more of the workload. But it's tolerable because we know there's an end date. We know that it won't last forever, and it's not like a whole nother job. And so tolerable stress is manageable, and it's okay as long as it does have that end date. But if it doesn't have an end date, and if it becomes even greater in severity, it becomes toxic stress. And this is where we start to feel the psychosocial, emotional, and physical responses from stress. When we're being kept up at night, when we're getting irritable, when we're feeling the physical effects because we're all tensed up and tight, when we're starting to call in sick more, that's the toxic stress. And then finally, if the stress just does not let up, it's completely chronic, it's so severe, it overwhelms our ability to cope, that's when it becomes trauma, when we cannot deal. So we call in sick for work every day. We can't get out of bed. We are so depressed that we can't even get motivated to do anything. That's when it becomes trauma. So that's kind of the continuum from positive stress all the way to when stress becomes traumatic. So what exactly is trauma? At CSW, we use the definition from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. And the definition there is an event, series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual. And we underlined experienced by because different people will have different reactions to stress and trauma. So we can't assume that everybody's going to have the exact same response. And it just depends on an individual's biological, chemical makeup, the family in which they're born, as to how they will respond to a traumatic event. Experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. So when somebody experiences trauma, they experience it like they are being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, by a bear. It is all automatic responses. The amygdala even shuts down, or the amygdala takes over, the frontal cortex shuts down. It is scary. And they just either want to get out of there or fight their way out. So it's not just, oh, I'm stressed out. Oh, my back hurts. This is like, get me the heck out of there. And has lasting, and so that's why sometimes people may have a more intense reaction to something. They think, well, I just told them that their report needs to be amended. Why did they freak out on me? They probably had a trauma triggering response. And that has lasting effects on an individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So trauma can have a long tail. In my experience, traumas that happened 40 years ago showed up again in the workplace when I had a bullying boss. I didn't even know that they were lurking out in my brain, but boy, they showed up. So keep that in mind as well. Traumatic events may be experienced by an individual, a generation, or an entire community or culture. So think of some of the historic traumas that we've seen with Indigenous peoples, with Black Americans due to slavery, etc. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the brain science and what happens to our brain on toxic stress or trauma. So some of you may have experienced these feelings recently or in the last few years: anger, body aches, brain fog, confusion, fatigue, et cetera, et cetera. Those could be normal automatic bodily responses to the abnormal experiences that we may experience personally or we've been experiencing collectively in our society and country. I mentioned those adverse childhood experiences, the chronic work stress, climate change trauma, poverty, violence and tension that we're seeing. Some of you may work with folks who experience these, and so you might be experiencing secondary trauma. And what happens is our brains, when they experience these abnormal experiences, go into survival mode. And the amygdala at the top of the brainstem there, which is our emergency alarm system in our brain, goes off, huge alarm system, actually shuts down the thinking and executive functioning part of our brain, because we don't need to analyze the 5 different ways of how to get away from the bear. We just need to get away from the bear. And that's what the amygdala is telling us. And in fact, the prefrontal cortex doesn't even get the memo for a long, several seconds. The amygdala is on it already and directing us on, what our response is going to be to that real threat or a perceived threat. Because even though our brains are like supposed to be the smartest part of our bodies, they can be pretty primitive sometimes. And, for somebody who's experienced trauma, taking a GED test can be as scary and alarming to a person's amygdala as being chased by a bear. And so we need to be able to recognize that, and we need to be able to address it and stop the brain from freaking out when it shouldn't be freaking out. So I just want to underscore that and then that leads to these normal automatic bodily responses. I just want to underscore that these are normal responses to abnormal events. So if you're experiencing this, you're the normal one. Your brain's just trying to save you and protect you from harm. And it's the experiences that are the abnormal parts of what's going on here. So how does all this translate into work? How does this affect us at work? Well, I am proud to say that I have stolen Mr. Sean Egan's little 3-level concept on how toxic stress and trauma can emerge at various levels to affect workers. And I just put my own little spin on it with the help of AI with this bullseye diagram. So at the individual level, with the person in the center of the circle there, as we've been talking about, an individual may have experienced personal psychological trauma, which may affect how they work. For example, if somebody was abused as a child, which is a type of adverse childhood experience, they may be hyper vigilant at work and constantly scanning and more sensitive to threats or perceived threats. So criticism from a boss over a report or a paper or the way that they do their work could be a perceived threat. And sending the brain into fight, flight, freeze, or submit mode. And it could be completely subconscious to the individual. So how do we deal with this? Especially as we're that person's supervisor. Well, we don't avoid the criticism. That's not helpful, because things do need to be, shared when people need to improve. But just make sure it's constructive criticism and not disparagement. The other thing that's really important is that people understand how their brains work and how these things affect them. So this is why CSW goes around and does training on trauma for many different types of organizations. So that way people know what's happening inside their brain and what they can do to put the brakes on that overactive brain when there's not really a threat there, and have a mentally healthier existence for their lives and for their workplace. So the second layer out is in the workplace. That's how toxic stress and trauma can affect us. We all know that our workplaces can be sources of chronic and toxic stress. And it could be, just from too much work. It could be from out of whack work-life balance. Our workplaces can also be sources of trauma, such as traumatic events like a death in the workplace or death by suicide. Think about the construction industry. And then outside of the workplace, there's things that can cause toxic stress and trauma experiences for us. We just talked about current events, the news, social media, all of the things that are happening in the world. They don't put on the brakes or check out when we check in for work. They follow us to work. And so we need to acknowledge that and deal with it. So many great statistics and information in Leo's workplace mental health report. I put a QR code there in case you haven't seen this report. I highly recommend that you take a look at it. So we talked about the behavioral responses, and this is what I mean by fight, flight, freeze, or submit. I think you'll understand fight and flight for the most part. Freeze is when, your brain freezes up literally, or you freeze up, or you have anxiety and you can't make any decisions or move forward. And submit's kind of a new one. Sometimes people call this fawn. And it's really when somebody just gives up. If you run into somebody who has a whatever attitude, they don't care, fine, I'll do whatever you want. They may just be submitting to the stressors, to the harms or the perceived threats that they're experiencing in the workplace. The other set of responses are physical responses, and this is so important. And again, very well documented in Leo's Healthy Work, Healthy Minds 2025 report. But as I've been talking about, whether we're facing a physical threat, being chased by a bear, whether we're overwhelmed at work, the amygdala sends off that emergency alarm system. In addition to the behavioral responses that we've already talked about, there are cortisol and adrenaline that start getting pumped through our bodies because they are designed to make us strong and alert for the actual threats that we're facing so we can fight off that bear or pick up that car that crashed and landed on somebody. But our bodies are not designed to have all of these hormones that get triggered during stressful times or traumatic times pumping through it all the time. So it actually wears our bodies down faster, called weathering, than normal. And so it'll weaken our immune system. It will affect our digestive system, lead to high blood pressure, heart issues, increased cancer risks. So toxic stress and trauma are slowly killing us, and we have an obligation to ourselves and to our colleagues and to our organizations to stop that. So here are some resources that we wanted to make sure that you have access to in case you are experiencing any of these potential traumas in your personal life or at work. A few hotlines around suicide, crisis, sexual assault, domestic violence. Just have these handy for yourself or for colleagues. And then I will just end it with letting you know that in episodes 2 and 3 of this series, we'll be talking about the more positive side of the coin, strengthening our regulation and resilience for ourselves and for our colleagues, and cultivating workplace cultures that are trauma-informed and that reduce toxic stress. So thank you so much for that lightning speed talk through what is toxic stress and trauma and how does it affect us. And I'm completely open for any questions you might have.
Well, thanks so much, Vicki. I think certainly in these three-part series, number one is really like what this is. And then as you saw from Vicki's slides, which we'll show again, part 2 and 3 are sort of the what do you do about it piece of this for both yourself and your organization. And I really love that. I think to kind of reinforce the impacts of stress on the body, I'll just use one example that seems helpful when I say it to people is if, did you ever wonder why you always seem to get sick at the worst possible time? And based on what Vicki was sharing with us all on how stress impacts us physically, that's what it is, right? You're weakening your immune system, thereby becoming more vulnerable to those types of illnesses. A couple of questions in the chat to get started. One is not a question, but I'm going to share it. One of our viewers on your cancer battle and you beating it right now said, congratulations so much. 3 BRCA mutations in my family. I've seen the battle in the family and personally. So hopefully everything's going great for that particular person. Another question that came in was somebody that's actually working in this space with some professional development series for nonprofit workforce. The funder's a little worried about how they can show improvement on using things like Bridges of Poverty, ACEs, hope, storytelling, data, and just curious in your professional experience if you have any suggestions on how to show health improvements and or decrease in stress that make it more measurable.
Yeah, so we, because we work mostly with workforce development organizations, we don't measure the health impacts. We tend to, after every training, do a learning quiz where we ask folks, did they learn the basics concepts? Have they been able to apply this in their work with customers in the workforce development or adult education or nonprofit space? And then we do, when we're able to do like a 1-year project, we'll survey folks at the beginning, at the end, and ask them if they've seen any organizational improvements. So I'm sorry that I can't help you out with any like health measurements because that's not part of what our work.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to share what we're thinking about in the LEADS program is that, and with your help, everybody watching is, we're doing a pilot. As you all know, by definition, pilots are limited term experiments, so to speak, to measure this. Our long run goal is to make this a more permanent fixture. And within the LEADS program, we're thinking about how you could have a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year kind of check in on certain aggregated health information so that you can start to see if there's changes in those impacts. With the pilot concept, we probably can't quite get there, but if we can build something that's going to last quite a long time, I think we can start to really find a way, because that's long-term data, to start measuring the sort of health impacts there. So I had one of the questions is sort of on ACEs. You share some stats on, like, if you've had 2 or more, these things are more likely. If you had a 4 or more, these things are more likely. Why is that the case?
Because these tend to be cumulative. And so, a lot of people can be pretty resilient when they've only had maybe a divorce in the family. There's enough protective factors to be able to outweigh the 1 or 2 adverse childhood experiences that somebody might experience. But once you start getting up to 3 or 4, it's more likely to overwhelm our coping mechanisms, and they start to sort of reinforce each other. So a parental divorce may lead into poverty, making it more likely that there's unstable housing, which then affects the kid's ability to be able to concentrate and stay in school. So because they start to like build off of each other, when you get additional ACEs, it's harder to roll that back. It's kind of like a spiraling down effect that counters a spiraling up effect for children in healthy environments.
And it creates a sort of long-term impact.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep. Absolutely.
A great book for anybody interested in further on that, called The Body Keeps the Score. And it kind of talks about the cumulative impacts of traumas in our life and different things, and why it is, as Vicki described, a cumulative impact.
And I just want to make sure, if you have experienced a lot of adverse childhood experiences or a lot of trauma, it doesn't mean you're broken and you won't be able to succeed in life. These things aren't automatic things that can happen in your life, automatic risk factors. It just means that you need to be more aware of how those things affect you individually and how they might be affecting you in your relationships, in your work life. And you may have to adopt some additional coping mechanisms, resilience building strategies to be able to offset those. And I personally think that folks who have experienced a lot of adverse childhood experiences, if they have that knowledge, if they've adopted those resilience builders and those protective factors for themselves, they are way stronger than many other people who have not been tested like that. And they're the ones who get stuff done. And so it can be in a healing way, very powerful to have experienced these things.
Yeah, I love that you reminded us all that you're not broken. I think what those stats really tell me is that we've just not done a good job at helping people understand what's happening, helping people understand stress. So a lot of it, like even today, one thing that's really critical from us at Leo is, as individuals, we should know this stuff, and we should understand what stress is doing to us, and we should understand what those adverse childhood experiences did, and kind of find ways to manage that. Now, you are not broken. Anybody should truly believe you're not broken. It's all good. And the goal with what the impacts of stress for me is just to show everybody that if this reaction is perfectly human, it's automatic, and it is what it is. So we can develop methods, to your point, mechanisms that we can kind of manage those types of things. So you mentioned in your professional experience sort of a re-triggering event based on your own personal adverse childhood experiences. Could you describe that just a little bit more?
Absolutely. So the adverse childhood experiences that I had as a kid, abusive father, poverty, parental divorce, unstable housing, and managed all that stuff, and graduated from high school, college, graduate school, motoring along in a great career. But in my early 40s, I had a bullying boss, somebody that I had really looked up to. But then they just turned into a bully, and my brain froze up. I couldn't do my work. I avoided them. I was like, what is going on? Why is my brain not working? And so I went to my doctor because I thought I had a brain tumor. And I said, look, you got to do an MRI or something. My brain's not working. I don't know what's happening here. And thank goodness my healthcare system was trained in trauma informed. And, she started asking me a little bit about my past experiences in childhood, and all the, trauma came out. And she said, "You don't have a brain tumor. You just had a retriggering. Your bullying boss is reminding your little brain, your amygdala, hidden deep down in there, of the bullying father, and that never got resolved. So you need to go upstairs and talk to the therapist." So I got fired from that job, and I had some time to go to the therapist, worked this out, learned all about the brain science and how I was not the broken one, but there was a hurt child inside of me that, really freaked out when this bad workplace experience happened. But now that I know how the brain works, I know how to calm the brain down, almost hack into it physically and calm it down whenever I'm in a stressful workplace situation. And I know how to kind of shape my work-life balance and my work life to be able to avoid stressors like that and re-triggering like that. So as I said, you can be stronger once you've been able to heal and realize what's happening.
Yeah, I love that. We're about at time. I got 3 questions that I think I can do a relatively quick answer. The QR code will be available after this. The name of the book was The Body Keeps the Score. And then we had a question on resources for easing our workforce into discussing mental health and stress from the construction industry. So you got certainly our resources at michigan.gov/workplace mental health. We have DHHS has a partnership with a thing called Man Therapy, which is an online tool specifically designed for male dominant industries like construction, where it's really targeted toward men. And then certainly if you look at the National Council for Mental Wellbeing, you'll see some things like mental health first aid and a couple of other tools that are there that can help with starting to have those conversations. But first and foremost, if people are willing and able, start telling the stories. I come from the construction industry, and I share everywhere my own story about battling depression, partly brought on by chronic stress, and kind of what that meant and how it felt. And there are ways within organizations that leadership on down can start to tell the stories that we all run into this, and there's ways that we can kind of share that information. So this was part 1 of 3. We'll have a couple more with our great friend Vicki. I'm so grateful that you are kicking cancer's butt and that you're continuing to get healthier. We're so happy for you and for all of us, because we get the privilege of continuing to work with you. And we'll see you in just the next couple of months, where we kind of pick up on this this concept and kind of dig into the what can you do as an individual and what can you do as an organization. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.